Good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Melco's application team, and we're doing our Design Shop Talk again today to see what questions you might have. We're live on both Facebook and YouTube, so you can type in your questions in the comment section of the live video, and I'll see those. Or if you see me looking off to the side, I have another monitor up with all the questions as they pop up, so I can be able to see them and get them answered real time for us. See what we can talk about. So I'm going to start off with the questions that were sent in ahead of time, and we'll kind of go from there. Let me make sure both platforms are up. Facebook is live and YouTube is. So looks like I am good to go. Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in with some of the questions that were sent in ahead. So this one was, can you give any advice on how to digitize the wings of birds? I've been asked to digitize a badge with an eagle on top and flight wings. The references I have are like this. The flight wings are like this. So how do we do that? All right. So if you look at these particular designs, you'll see that, each feather, if you will, is kind of a satin stitch. So you've got a satin stitch here, a satin stitch there, satin stitch, and it just keeps on going, forming those. And that's how you get that detail. Same with this, is there's a series of column stitches that are kind of layered up together to give you that look. All right. So I have this guy that I did quick beforehand just to have something to show you guys. So really all it boils down to is doing a series of satin stitches, of column stitches. So in this case, you can see over here I did column 1, and then kind of working your way through it. What do you want on the bottom? What do you want on top, right? So these, let's turn that on. Let's turn the whole design off, and I will turn on a few of these. So actually what I'll do, sorry, I should have done this beforehand. I will take, let's say the bottom, those. I'm just gonna operations. I'm gonna copy paste, changing my mind. Copy paste. So copy paste, right click, convert to vector. Cool. All right, so now I'm gonna turn that off, and now I have something to trace anyway. All right, so all of these guys, these feathers, if you will, are all column stitches that I did, right? So you decide, how do you want to build this? How do you want it to sew? Well, I wanted it to go center out, right? So you can start off with either a column 1 or a column 2. These are too overlappy, so I can't see them. But it's, you just kind of work your way through them and maybe do a right click to curve it a little. Not very curvy. Let's curve it more. All right, so there's one. And I started here, I stopped down here. And so then you decide, how do you want the next one to go? All right, and assuming you have art to trace, you would just, work your way through the design, building your feathers for your bird as you go. All right, and then one thing you'll notice is if I were to run this just as I have drawn here, you'll notice that my start is not near there. So if I update my trims, depending on what my settings are for my starts and stops, or what the trim is, I might have a trim in there. If you don't want a trim, you can always move the start point over to where the propeller is, and then you'll be good to go. There's a question on the satin stitch. Can you overlay too much? How would I know what too much is? The more you overlay it and the more the threads are nested, overlaid, they're gonna kind of blend together, right? So your underlay will help some of that. And the more you stack it, you're also going to end up with kind of bulky areas. So too much, it's really a personal preference. I tend to aim for 5 to 7 points of overlap between elements, generally closer to 7. And that's simply because as things move, I don't want to have gaps between it. That's a personal preference. So you'll find everyone's going to do things a little bit different. But, 5 to 7 points is usually pretty decent. But literally you just work your way through the design, building these feathers up, right? So what I had here, you can see I have probably too much overlap, honestly. Let's see, how much is that? 20 points, yeah. So on the one I did, I was being lazy. So it would be better off if I did something closer to that. But this sews out really well. I sewed it, so yeah. But build around what you want on top. So these are underneath, and I want these feathers on top. So work my way back, walk out and do this top, run over to the other side. Some tricks you can always do is once you get one side nice, if it's a mirror, you can always copy, paste, mirror, using that guy there, and then move this one over, right? So you don't have to redo the entire sequence again. So you always have that as an option to create mirror images of things. And then of course you do your center part. So one fun thing, if you know you don't want it to have any trims in there, make sure you're updating your auto trims and check and see if any trims appear. If trims appear, you need to pay attention to where your starts and stops are so that you can rearrange them or add running stitches, things like that. So you won't have gaps between there. Okay. Good morning, Lorena. So hopefully that helps with the wings. It's when you're talking about eagles and things like that, if it's getting really small, another technique you can always do is rather than doing individual feathers like this, you can do that as a solid fill and then do a running stitch over it to get your detail in a different color. So that's another technique you can do, but it really is what level of detail are you looking to go. Keep in mind your satin stitches, your column stitches, you don't want to get them too small. And too small, what is too small? Well, your needle, I don't know, I would say no smaller than 12 to 15 points. 12 points probably is the smallest I would personally go. Okay. Let's see. We have, Alexandria, welcome. What Actifeed minimum would you recommend for a stabilizer webbing project? So that we were talking about. So this is webbing on stabilizer, trying to do some text on it. So how do you go about doing that? Minimum Actifeed, it kind of depends on which machine. I happen to know you have the newer X, right? So those on the newer machines, the Actifeed's higher than on older machines. So about 4 to 7 points, depending on what you're running. For your webbing, probably what I would run is I would start honestly around 8 or 9 and kind of go up from there. And because it's a thicker material, make sure you have it nice and stabilized, which we had talked about, different techniques on doing that. And I would use a nice stabilizer on there too. Basting stitches is another nice way. So let's say you're using a 1-inch webbing. Let me draw a rectangle. So I'm going to do a vector rectangle. And let's make that 1 inch. So why am I doing this? That's the size of the webbing, right? So you can always decide where you're going to put a basting stitch on there and how far up, and then just change this to something like 50 or 60 points. That way it's easy to pick out. And you can do that on both the top and the bottom, to hold the webbing in place and then cut it out later. So if it's moving around more than you want, that would be a good technique to try. Okay, but I would probably start around 8 or 9 and kind of go up from there. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, so back to this guy. It looks like I missed a question. So one of them was, when moving this over to the, all right, so let me just delete that. All right, so if I'm going to copy and paste this and move it over, how do I make sure this stays lined up? All right, so if I do Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste, I'm going to delete that, show you another way. So you can also select it, right-click, and go to Duplicate. It all does the same thing. All right, so then I'm going to mirror it using the horizontal mirror. Now, if you hold alternate, that locks it. Right, so to horizontal and vertical. So I'm holding my alternate key down while I left click and move, and that way it keeps it lined up horizontally. So I can move it around, up or down, side to side, however you want. Okay, and place it. So let me quick scan back and see if I missed any others. Oh, yeah, we have another one. Came in on Facebook. Can you adjust the tie-in and tie-offs on already digitized files? It kind of depends on how it was digitized. So in this case, this is wireframe based. So if I want to change the tie-in and tie-offs, absolutely. I can right click, go to properties, tie-in and tie-off, and let's say I want to change those to style 5s. Okay, I can change it to a style 5, apply, and now all of those have style 5 tie-in and tie-outs. If it's expanded file type, that gets a little weirder because expanded file types don't have the tie-in and tie-outs digitized. Let me take that back. The digitizer would have put them in, but they are not wireframe based. So I can't just go click a button and say change from this type of knot tie out to this type of tie out. So you would have to adjust the stitches individually, which can be not so fun. So, but yeah, you can do it. Tara, welcome. Let's see, what stabilizer should I be using for an apron? Okay, so aprons typically are kind of like a twill or canvas type fabric, which is a heavier weight, maybe a 7 or 8 ounce bottom weight fabric. So it's a pretty decent fabric. So you can get away with lighter stabilizers if you want. I'll say I personally love cutaways. It's just a really strong personal preference just because how it holds everything so nice. So I would use a 3.1 ounce, or mainly because I love that stabilizer, the 3.1 ounce cutaway that Madeira makes. It's super hefty stabilizer. It's great stuff. You could probably also get away with a heavy tearaway if you want to go that route because the material is pretty heavy, but I just like the stability and the security you get with a cutaway rather than a tearaway. So I would use anything over 2.5 ounce on a cutaway personally. Wow. Let's see. Can you show how to change the faux mirror rectangle from the Melco shape into a heart shape? Okay. So I assume because you're asking that you don't, well, let's do this. So let's go look at that. Faux mirror, patch borders, the rectangle. So you want to take that and turn it into a heart. Okay. So I would do it a different way, but let's do it. So I can add a point here, drag it down there. I'm going to delete these other guys. I can add them back later. So did that. I'm going to delete all these other points. And to do that, I'm going to use this custom point selection and select those guys, hit delete. I got a goofy triangle. I can add a point here, drag that down. It's an ugly heart at this point. So now what? I deleted my other triangle. And now I can add curves. If I hold the control key when I move a point, it'll make it an arch. So I can add a point. I don't like doing it this way, by the way, but you can do it this way. Let's see, let's add another curve. Right click. Yeah, this is not how I would do it. Let's see. So you can just keep on messing with the wireframe to do that. Honestly, what I would do is just draw a heart, right? So let's see, do they have a heart shape here? I think there is one. Yeah, so there's a heart. So if I grab the heart shape that's already there, make it the size I want, and then I can hold the control key down and click on the walk. Control click. That makes it a walk. And from here, I would then go change it to a decorative and then go down to faux mirror and find the appropriate faux mirror. So there's a faux mirror 1 and a faux mirror 2. There, that's a better one because that's on the inside where the chain stitch is on the inside. So then it's just a matter of cleaning up the corner, not with that button. Hold this down, split the element, and did I not split it? Of course not. Why would it? There we go. All right, so then I can go and move these points around to get a better overlap. Okay, so I would do it that way and then just adjust these points as needed. Let's see. You're asking, would I just cut around the outside edge and leave the rest, or cut it all off? What? Oh, for the I think you're asking about the stabilizer on an apron. I would just, on the back side, you cut around, leaving about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch if you're using a cutaway. Okay, so let's see. Back up. I'm scrolling up through my questions. I see one on YouTube. I'll be there in a second. So what's the best fabric to get the most detail in a design? Heavy, really stable fabrics, so beautifully. I love the detail you can get on a heavyweight twill or a heavyweight canvas. Things that stretch and move around a lot or are very soft, you're going to embed threads in, so it's not going to show up as nicely, but you can take a nice twill, a heavy, even the laminated twills that you get from like, Stalls or Twill USA. So any of those laminated ones, the thread just sits so beautifully on top, so you can get a ton of detail, and it doesn't move around a lot because it's really stable. That's what I see. I don't know, Jason, if you have others that you like, but a heavy twill or basically anything that just doesn't move, that has no real good stretch and is a nice heavy material, it does really nicely. Megan, did that help you with how to make a faux marrow in a heart shape? Hopefully it did. Let me know if it didn't. Yeah, a heavy cotton, same deal. The cotton twill, poly twill. Yeah, just heavy. Jason says the heavy cotton is his preference, but yeah, anything that's nice and heavy, a bottom weight fabric, so it's really nice, particularly if it doesn't stretch. Okay. Let's see, on YouTube we have a question. Is there any way you can show us a quicker way to create a gradient text or a gradient background and then type any text over the gradient, if that makes any sense? Well, gradient backgrounds are pretty easy, right? So gradient text is a little more complex. So there's, short of just doing the work, it just takes time. So the background, though, you can take a complex fill. You can, well, actually, let's do it this way. So I've got these custom shapes down here. I'm going to left click and drag one on here. Make it whatever size you want. Oh, there's a bug in the version I'm running. I'm sorry. Let me close that and open up. I'm running a beta of the software, so let me open up the previous version because we ran into this last week, I think. Melco. This is the current version. DesignShop. Okay. All right, so back to what I was doing. Custom shapes. Left click on this guy, drag it up here, make it whatever size you want. All right, so now we have a shape, but we want it to be a blend or a gradient. So I can go into the properties, go to effects, turn on custom density, click blend, hit apply, choose a different color, and now I've got a gradient, right? So from here, it's just a matter of playing with it to get what you want, what look you're trying to go for. So if you want, you can play with these. I'll say I tend to turn on auto apply. I know Nate and I very differ on how we like to do this, but I turn on auto apply, add points, and I usually make gross motions so I can see which direction changes are being made, and then I start messing with it from there, right? So I'll add, left clicks and right clicks depending on what look I'm going for, and just play with it until it looks how I want. You'll notice this weird line down the middle. It's because my start and stop's in the middle, so I can change that and get rid of it, and now I've got a gradient. So then you can, of course, put text on top of it, right? So that's a quick and easy way to create your gradient backgrounds. Now, gradient text, I don't know of any. Oh my gosh, that scared me. I'm sorry, there's a nasty storm here today. So let's see, 3D. All right, so I'm gonna go into properties, change this to a flat fill. I wonder, I've never tried this. Let's see if it works. that's kind of fun. Okay, so if I do it as a flat fill, doesn't look like it does what we think it should. So, although, is it? I don't do it this way. So I usually take so it is doing a blend. So you could do it that way. But what I usually do is take the text that I want, convert it to wireframe, and now I've got the shape here that I can go to effects, custom, blend, give it a color, and do the same thing I was doing before of just playing with the curves, if you will, to get whatever look you want. Okay, so, and it gets more interesting. I can come over to this, turn on Trapunto to get those travel stitches out of the middle, and you can get blended text that way. So that would be quicker than doing it straight by hand. Otherwise, the way you'd have to do it is, the traditional way of splitting it, setting your two colors, putting a blend across the middle, or however it is of what blend look you're trying to get with the text. Okay, Armando, does that does that help any? I hope it does. Hope I didn't confuse you with all my fumbling around. So again, if I select the letter, go into properties, effects, custom density, blend, give it another color, and then just, choose the different blend types. Then to get rid of the travel stitches, you can turn on the Trapunto. And you can get a blended text that way. Okay. Let's see, what other questions do we have? We talked about the marrow, the fabric, heavy cotton. Cool. All right, so that was fun. What else do we have? Is it possible to arrange several copies of the same design, such as keychains, in one large frame and make it at the same time? Yes, you can. Just keep in mind, you gotta think about how it's going to sew if you're doing a really heavy design or something like that. All right, let's look at it. So I'm going to turn on the hoop, and let's right click on the hoop, come over here, and let's say I'm going to use the big old square. Okay, awesome, Alexandra, I'm glad. She said she just ran a strap and it looks good, so that's great. Okay, so let's say I've got this, and let's make a really quick and dirty key fob. It's not going to be pretty. I'll just tell you that right now. So I'm going to copy paste, and let's say the snaps I'm going to use are 1/2 inch. So let's make this 0.5 wide. Oops. And I'm going to drag this guy down and up. Like I said, this is going to be ugly, but let's say we're going to make a luggage tag of some kind. I'm going to combine that. And then convert it to a running stitch. Okay, so I have an ugly luggage tag here that maybe I'm going to put an S on. All right, so the actual design, I'd have a walking stitch, a bean stitch to hold my fabric down, give it another color. I would sew my letter, and then I'd want to put a back on the fabric. A piece of vinyl on the back to cover it all up. All right, and I'll do that as a bean stitch too. All right, so I have a really quick and not so pleasant looking luggage tag. All right, so what do we do with this? All right, so if we want a bunch of these for whatever reason in the hoop, so you can come over here, and there's a few easy ways you can do this. So first off, I'm going to center it just because. I'm going to go object, where is it? Step and repeat. And you can play with this and do previews and see what it's going to look like and how it's going to fill if it fills how you expect. So I kind of like that, so I'm going to say okay. But what I'm going to do now is grab these guys, mirror them, and nest it a little more, because let's say I want to get more out of my fabric. Oops, and I need to mirror that one more time. I can't just do it that way. There. Okay, so now I have a better use of the area, right? So again, I can center this. Now, this is cute, but I'm assuming this is what you don't want to do, right? Have each one run individually. In completion, you want to sew all of step 1, and then all of the S's, and then all of the backs. All right, so that becomes just a sorting exercise. So I probably should not have colored them this way to make it easier. But what I tend to do is just drag these and turn on merge colors and just take the first step and put them all together, right? So you'll see. Now, why isn't there an auto sort? You know, you really have, if you're going to do things like this, you got to think about it, because if you try to run things all in one hooping, and particularly if it's a heavily stitched design, things tend to shift, right? And if it shifts, it'll look good right where it started, but by the time you get to the end, things move and they're not going to line up. So you really have to pay attention to the design. Now here, little S's is probably not going to move much, particularly if I hoop well, right? So I probably could get away with doing all of this at once. So here's another way I can hold my control key, select all of those at once, and drag them all up. All right, so there's all of the first stitch. Then I can do the same with the second. So select all the second, which is my actual tack down of the vinyl. Let's say I'm going to do these with marine vinyl. All right, so I can left click and drag those up there. All right, so there's all the actual stitch down. So then I can grab my monogram, which in this case is one letter, not much of a monogram, but you know, you get the idea. All right, and I can drag those all up. And now I can grab all of these and combine them, which is the final stitch for the back. Cool. These guys we don't need anymore, so I'm going to delete them. All right, so that's one way we can go ahead and color sort and create, you know, something that fits in your hoop, right? So I usually turn on the hoop, that way I can optimize the area, pack them in as close or as far apart as I want to, you know, whatever you're trying to do project-wise. So just keep in mind, if you're doing heavily stitched items, be careful with this. For instance, if I'm doing a whole bunch of patches in one hoop, you know, it's repeats of the same thing over and over again. If it's heavily stitched, I'll tend to do groups of 2. I'll still make it one file so that they're sewing them all to fill up the hoop, but I'll do 2 or 3 that are grouped close together and then do the next segment, do the next segment. That way it finishes it out as it's going. You know, you'll see in some of the videos, they say good practice is to always outline as you go. That's the same thing. You want to finish as you go, so you don't end up with huge separations where things aren't lining up and you end up having to scrap segments. Okay, so you can still do it in one hoop, just group it so that it's sewing them all out kind of along the way. Okay, I don't see anything on YouTube. Let's see. And I don't see any that I missed on Facebook, so cool. All right, so that was one quick and dirty key fob for you, or luggage tag. All right, so we did that. Okay, if you have a design, can I just put a wide border around it and make it into a mug cozy and just cut around the border? I can use an applique stop, put a material on the back to clean it up before sewing the border. Yeah, you can do that. So let's look at that. So where's DesignShop? Come back. There we are. So let's do a new file. I'm going to go open, which one? I like this one. It's cute. All right, these are just designs I bought. All right, so if you want to turn it into a if you just put a border around it, you're going to have to either cut wide so that you can create that shaggy look, right, with the fabric. So you can sew a border, kind of add fringe by cutting little fringes and kind of ruffle the fabric, and that will give you kind of a fringed look. So that's one way you can do it. Another would be to take fabric, right, 2 pieces of fabric, and press them so that it's folded, right? So you have 2 folded edges, which are nice and clean, And when you go to put the fabric down after you run the design, you overlap them so that when you turn the project inside out and press it, you now have clean edges that you don't have to seal, right? So it kind of makes a little pocket. So let's look at both of those, how you would do it. So if I take this design, I'll zoom out a little bit. Let's say I want to just do a single line center. And what you do is you'd sew the whole design out on your fabric. You would probably then do a applique stop so that you can put fabric on the back. And then you would run a border. So how would you run your border? I would just do, it depends on what shape you want. I'm going to do an oval. So I'm going to do that, do my circle tool, left click, and then I'm just going to drag this. I'm going to adjust it in a second. So when I get an oval, this storm is going to be ugly today. Oh my goodness. I don't like lightning much. All right. So let's say that, and we'll make this closer to 40 points, just because. 40, enter, there. That's cute. Okay, so how would you do this? You would sew this design out on your hooped fabric. You would have an applique stop, shove fabric on the bottom, pin it, tape it, use spray adhesive, make it stay. Okay, stay nice and flat. And then you'd run this border. So then when you're done, you would unhoop it, trim around. And if you trim close, you might have frayed fabric, right? So what if you want to do it like a big patch? That would be one way we could do it. So to avoid that, the frayed look or having to trim really close to it, well, I can always copy this, paste this, move it up, and then change that from a single line to a placement stitch, right? So how would I do that? Select it, hold the control key down because I'm going to change it from one element type to another. If I held the shift key, it would just add, but I want to change it. So I select the element, hold the control, click on the running stitch, our walk stitch tool right here. All right, so there's my placement. So now I can Control C, Control V, change that to a bean stitch, give it another color, Control C, Control V, and basically I'm setting this up like a patch is really what I'm doing. So this one I'm going to hold the control, change it back to a placement or a satin stitch, which was this guy here, change its color and change that to a tackle, and let's make it closer to 30 points. Okay, so how do you sew this? Well, running stitch, grab my fabric, lay it on top, then run my bean stitch, grab a pair of scissors, cut relatively close to the edge of this guy, then you run this guy. Now you're going to do all your embroidery. Okay, once you're done, now it's ready to put the lining on the back. So I want to copy this guy and paste it after there. So I'm going to put fabric on the bottom, run that stitch, have an applique stop, take the hoop off the machine, trim it, and my last stitch is going to be this. All right, and then you can just rip away, whatever, cut away the stabilizer, rip it away, whatever you're doing. Okay, so that would be one way you could do this. You could also set it up to be like an in the hoop project that you turn. All right, so rather than doing this single line stitch, I would then get rid of most of this actually. So I would just run the design and then have this run as a bean stitch. And you would just put the fabric, instead of underneath the hoop, on top of the hoop with it overlapping. So pretend these are folded pieces of fabric that I held up earlier. So you would lay it with the wrong side down with them overlapping. So the folds are overlapping, wrong side down. Sew that circle, and then when you cut it out, now I can turn it inside out and my back will be lined and covered up. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so yeah, you can do whatever you want with those. Okay. So yeah, you can turn any design into a mug rug, if you will. Let's see, what other ones do I have? Same deal, like if I wanted to turn this guy into a little mug or design mug rug, what I would personally do is just add a circle larger than the design, anyway, I would get it looking how I want it to look, right? Which, that's not, no, I don't like that. Anyway, you would just add a shape around it in the shape you want, change it to a different color. And I personally would make it a bean stitch, even a bean stitch with a retrace, just to make sure it's nice and secure. Lay the fabric on top with that folded edge overlapping on both of the fabrics. Cut it out, turn it inside out, give it a good press, and you're good to go. Okay. All right. Oh, Kathy, great. I'm glad you enjoy it. I try to be useful. All right, can I get some help on sewing a patch on a 112 Richardson hat from beginning to end? I have a patch I bought but don't have files to make attached stitch. Can I use a clear mono? If so, what settings do I use and what needle? I'll say I personally have not used the clear mono thread on our machines, mainly because I've sewn for a long time before I got into embroidery, and clear thread in my sewing machines always made me mad. So because of that, I've not even bothered trying it because I have such an aversion to that thread in general. Just how mad it would make me on my sewing machines that I haven't tried it. I probably should, because it'd be nice to use clear thread for sewing stuff down. As far as the only thing I would say, depending on the mono thread you choose, if it's got some stretch to it, be careful. And that's what always aggravated with me, is it was almost like a rubber band, and it would make me so mad on a sewing machine. But assuming it's a nice thick, stable thread, you would pick the appropriate size needle. Most of the thread manufacturers will actually have recommended needle sizes with them. So I would just go with whatever they recommend and run it slow with a higher Actifeed. That's what I would do, assuming it breaks easy. But I would have to test it to try it. That's what I would start with. A slightly higher Actifeed, whatever needle they suggest, and just try it. Now, as far as setting up the files, let's say, there. So I have a blank patch. So you got to know which the size. I'm assuming it's a round patch. If it's not, you're going to have to get the shape and figure out what shape it is that you're going to run down. But let's say I've got this 3-inch patch and I want it to sew inside the border a little bit. So you would really just come over here, do a walk stitch. You can do the circle tool just to make it easy. Hold the shift key down to lock it to a perfect circle. And let's say like that, okay. So this patch, of course, is already going to be made. So I don't need it there. I just have it here to have something to trace to. So let's say that's where I want my running stitch to be. So how would I set up the actual file? All right, so let's delete the stuff. All right, so I've got the shape, the size I want. So I'd have my walk stitch, which is going to run the placement. Then I grab my patch and lay it down. Now, hopefully you're using some sort of sticky back on the patch itself to hold it in place. Particularly with hats, they're so curved that you really don't want your fingers in there. It's just, don't put your fingers in machines. I have scars of why you shouldn't do that. If you have to use anything, putting hands in the machine, use a chopstick. The wooden ones are better because if you hit it, you break a needle. You don't break a bone. So if you got to stick your fingers in a machine, use a chopstick. But better yet, just don't do it. Use something sticky to secure this fat patch down around the circle. And then the next step on here would be to have another stitch. I would probably do a normal with a retrace. That way it runs fast all the way around and then comes back a second time. Okay. I also like to make sure that this goes over it a little bit more. So from there, what I would do is wherever it ends, I would do a running stitch, just go a little bit further past it. That's just, I like doing that when I did a whole bunch of patches. It wasn't a hat, but I outsourced the patches because it was something like 1,000 of them. And when I got it back, I had to put them all on the arm of a shirt. And for that, I did this exact way. I did a running stitch. I stuck the patch down and then ran this. Popped it off, went again. So it goes really easy, but that's how I'd set up the file. And it may take a little bit of trial and error to make sure your shape is the right size. But the first one is just to give you a placement of where you're going to stick it. The second one is to actually sew it down. Now, as far as your Actifeed and whatnot, if you're using the clear thread, I don't know. I personally would have to play with it and try it and see what it is. It looks like Gina says that Sulky makes a clear invisible thread that's a polyester. That's cool. Which means it wouldn't melt under an iron and doesn't stretch. So, hey, maybe I'll buy that and try it, and just because clear thread would be cool. So, worth a try. Polyester threads are nice. But it's a monofilament. So monofilaments are really thin. So it's kind of like what you would use on your bobbin thread. So think of that more along the lines of what you would have if you're using a small needle and whatnot. So you may have to go around it a few times just to make sure it's nice and secure. Okay, let's see. Although monofilaments tend to be really strong. Anyway, thinking out loud now. All right, what else do we have? I need a class from the very beginning, like click on the DS icon and then continue. Okay, so if you go to, let me go there for you. All right, so if you go to melcouniversity.com, so literally type melcouniversity.com, you don't have to have this, it'll come back by itself. All right, over here, click on the media tab. From the media tab, right here are some playlists, depending on what version you have. So version 11, I would start here and just watch the videos and go down top to bottom. It's a really good overview of how to use the software. The first ones are really on editing and understanding, navigating around it, working with files that already exist. Down here is when you get into the actual, how do you create files from scratch? How do you digitize? I don't recommend you start down here, start up here, because there's, you need all these skills that you learn up here when you get into digitizing. So I would start at the top and work your way down. All right. So that's what I would recommend for, how to get started learning digitizing. Okay. And we did get you a link to that, but yeah, it's Melco University, and go from there. Let's see. Not really a design shop question. Do you have a startup process? Design shop, Melco OS, turn on the machine, load machine, that sort of thing. Yeah. So I always start the OS first and then load the machines. I run multi-head, so I don't load files from DesignShop. I load them straight in the OS. So I don't even bother with DesignShop. So when I'm loading files from DesignShop, I tend to open DesignShop first, then the OS. I don't think it matters, honestly, but that's just how I always have done it. Open DesignShop, open the OS, turn on the machine, and then I can send designs from the DesignShop straight to the OS. Okay. But it's always OS before I power on the machines. That's the only thing I pay attention to. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? All right. Well, I don't see any more questions typed in. Quick looking. So looks like I talked about all those. Yeah, Alexander Lightning and I don't get along. And it's straight out black. It looks like night outside right now. Okay, nothing on YouTube. Awesome. All right, well, those are all the questions that we had ahead of time. So if you have questions down the line, of course, you can always ask them on these talks. We have them on a weekly basis, or at least try to. Thursdays or Fridays. This week was supposed to actually be yesterday, but I had a conflict with medical appointments with one of my kids. So next week will be Friday again. So you got that. Let us know what you want to learn, and we'll try to work on that. But short of that, I don't have anything else to talk about. So you guys have a fantastic Easter or weekend, which if that's more your thing. And we will be back next week. Oh, it's tax day, I guess. Or it will be shortly. So have a fantastic weekend, and I will be back next week to see what questions we have. All right. Till then, have fun sewing and have a good weekend.